Alright, so nagbabalik tayo sa ating violin tips and tricks. And for today's video, let's talk about playing from memory or memorizing your pieces, no? How could you do it more effectively and more efficiently? And how I actually personally do it, no? So, when we talk about memorizing certain pieces, di ba? Parang ang hirap-hirap, to be honest, to memorize like a certain piece. Let's say a concerto that could take 50 to an hour, 50 minutes to an hour to perform. Paano mo ma-memorize yung ganong kahaba, no? So, we'll talk about some strategies that you could do and of course, things that you need to consider before memorizing. So, first things first, this video is not going to be talking about the prerequisites bago ka mag-memorize. Syempre, when you are memorizing something, it should be already understood na alam mo na yung techniques, your fingerings are okay, your interpretation is spot on, alam mo na, no? You have everything built up. Basically, at this point, in your practice or in your lessons, in your rehearsals of a certain piece, dapat dito sa point na to, before you really focus on memorizing those things, is you're at the point na confidently playing ka na dun sa piece na yun. You can confidently play your pieces if not for memory, but with a score, no? Kailangan nandun ka na muna sa level of mastery na yun before you move on to memorizing. And maybe when you reach that level already, you already have this sort of memorized parts, di ba? Siyempre, kailangan mo na-memorize mo din yung certain passages na medyo mahirap. You have to memorize steps in between how you will be able to go from point A of the piece to the point B of the piece, di ba? So yun, kailangan that all those things are already covered before you really start memorizing lang na doon ka na nakafocus. Okay? So, when we memorize things, people tend to think na we memorize it note per note. But actually, that is a harder thing to do, di ba? Kung memorize mo one note at a time, it would take you literally years before you could play something effectively from memory. So, what do we do? It's the same thing with memorizing literature. Let's say, when you are memorizing a poem, for example, you don't memorize the letters on its own. Not even the words, di ba? You don't focus on letters and words. What do you focus on? You focus on the complete thought of a sentence, for example. Di ba? Because the flow of that is easier to memorize than memorizing smaller chunks, no? So you want to condense everything to be a little bit bigger and easier to absorb. So the same thing happens when we're memorizing a piece of music. So for example, your music is composed of, let's say it's a simple piece, no? Eight systems or 8 lines of notes of music. So instead of memorizing one note at a time, you don't even memorize per measure. You try to memorize the complete thought of it. So kung saan siya natatapos, where the thought starts and where it ends. So let's say for 8 lines, no? 8 lines, you could memorize 2 at a time, 2 lines or 2 systems at a time. And then pag nakuha mo na yon, you can memorize the next one. So instead of memorizing, let's say even 8 separate things, you just memorized 4. You just took the thought of 4. Now, on those four segments that you memorize, maybe 2 or 3 of them are the same thing or are conveying the same thought or using the same passage, the same patterns. So it becomes easier. Mas madali mo siyang ma-accept or it's easier for you to really put it inside of your memory, no? Para matugtog mo siya ng mas maayos. You're not relying on note. You're not gonna miss out on notes lang na minsan, ay mali yung note na natugtog mo because you already understood the flow. Saan papunta yung music? Saan papunta yung mga notes? And using that to your advantage because you can listen to it properly, di ba? You can then memorize more and more. Okay? So, do it per segment. A segment that is complete, no? Kumbaga complete sentences yung i-memorize mo. Now, when you're done with the sentences, you go into paragraphs, no? So when we talk about bigger works, like for example, a concerto, a violin concerto could take, yun nga, a single movement could be around 20 to 30 minutes long depending on the movement, di ba? So, paano mo naman i-memorize yun? So, you memorize the paragraphs, no? So, it's the same thing with memorizing a song naman. So, when you memorize a song, what's the first thing that comes into mind is chorus. Kasi, laging paulit-ulit. But, in classical music, the chorus doesn't always come out. What always retains in your head is yung intro, yung umpisa na, di ba? So, when you memorize those things, you take it by chunks. No? By chunks. Usually, pieces naman, pag nakasulat na masyado ng mahahaba, they put orchestra marks or, big letters to denote a change in what's happening. And of course, understanding each part. Ano ba yung part na yun? So, it's the same with memorizing, verse dito, tas chorus, tapos verse ulit, tas chorus, tapos may bridge. Diba? Pop songs generally are that form. Now, it's a different form for a concerto, no? But the thing is, the A part ends here, the B part starts here, so you can memorize the whole thing from A, and then try to memorize B, and then C, and then D, no? Or if you want to get technical with the terms, no, of the form, no, you can start, you memorize the exposition, and then you go through it, no, development, and then you go to the recap. So those types of things, no, use that to your advantage. Because if you memorize note per note, it's very, very long and tedious. You might miss out on some techniques. Of course, what's the most important thing is that you're not really memorizing the sheet. What you're memorizing is the music. And the sheet or the score does not tell the whole picture. It's just a guide. It can't tell you emotions, right? You can read the emotions, but it won't really translate unless you play it. So the thing about memorizing is you have to memorize the music, not the notes. Okay? So the notes are there to serve as a guide para hindi ka mawala with regards to the form or where you're going, what's next. Of course, if it's a bigger piece, you have more people playing, diba? Even if it's a piano reduction or you have a pianist that you have to also listen to, because not all the time you're playing. Sometimes you're resting. And the thing about learning a large work is that you also have to memorize other people's parts. Not necessarily play them, but you could recall what's happening, diba? Kunwari, tumigil ka, you stop because there's an orchestra part in the middle. You have to know, ilang bars ba? You can't really count just the bars, but you have to understand the thought, the music that comes in. And then, saan ka papasok, where your entrances be. That's why we have cues, diba? Some cues are written in the score, but sometimes you just really have to listen what's happening, what's gonna happen next, diba? And those are the things that you need to memorize. So, another thing you have to take note is to listen, okay? Now, there are cons to this, no? Because if you tend to listen to one specific recording, for example, of a certain piece, your interpretation will be limited to that. So when you try to listen to memorize, try to listen to different types of, different musicians playing the same piece para hindi ka malimit dun sa ginagawa ng isa. Okay? So you're not limited to a certain interpretation. Maybe you like that interpretation and you want to give it something on your own. But when you're trying to memorize that, try to memorize it in a way that it won't impede or it won't mess up what you already know. So again, kailangan pag nag-memorize tayo, alam na natin. Di ba? Hindi pwedeng mag-memorize tayo tapos tsaka lang natin siya aaralin. It's gonna mess you up very, very bad. No? So, techniques come into play. Bago ka pa dapat mag-memorize, yung fingering mo might need a little bit of a tinkering, but it's already working out for you. Because if you memorize it at a very early stage while you're learning it, you might even memorize the bad habits that you also develop or the wrong things that you were doing prior to really building up the piece. No? So, memorizing technically should be almost the last thing when you're trying to prepare. This is just for me, So, it should be the last thing because at the end, pag na-build up mo na yung technique, you're technically already well-versed with the music that you're studying. So, medyo na-memorize mo na talaga siya. So, mas madali. Instead of memorizing at the beginning stages of learning, tapos pagdating sa dulo, memorize mo na naman ulit kasi marami na masyado nagbago. So, when you're trying to play from memory, make sure the techniques are set, and then, best thing to do talaga is to listen and try to look at the bigger picture in itself. Because the minute things, naayos mo na yan. Okay? Maybe we can do another video on the things before you memorize. So, what are the things that you need to work on para mas maganda yung pag-memorize mo? At the end of the day, when you want to play from memory, coming from a music score, you have to really listen, understand what's happening, and take it as a whole, and then divide it into smaller chunks. And then pag na-divide mo na siya into smaller chunks, make it into bigger yet manageable pieces in order for you to really put it into your system, into your memory, para mas madali tayo. No? We don't need food supplements for this. But all we need is to be aware of the things happening inside the score and the music itself. So kung nakatulong tong video na to, please do drop a like, comment down below more content you'd like to see, and of course subscribe to my YouTube channel for a lot more content, including covers and of course podcasts and violin tips and tricks. So follow me on all my socials, everything you need down in the description box below. This has been Ryan Monakil for Violin Tips and Tricks, and I'll see you on the next video.